What it do, citizens of P-Town? You know what this is. This is none other than me tier listing the books that I read in 2024. Now, I'm not going to act like I'm this big reader, especially not as big of a reader as I am into video games or movies. But just like you can get to know someone through the video games and the movies that they like, you can also get to know someone through the books that they read. And so today in this video, I'm going to be tier listing everything that I read in 2024. Let's get into the tiers. At the very top right there, the best books that I read in 2024. That's going to be the For the Bookworms tier. Below that, we have still in a great territory, cover to cover great tier. Right there. Below that, we have the page turner tier. Now, in this casual read tier are for the more casual reads, the books that I wasn't as engrossed in day to day, chapter to chapter. Below that, we have probably writing a bad book report. These are for the books that either I didn't really like that much or for whatever reason don't remember much. So, I would just be making up bullshit in a book report, probably get a bad grade. And at the very bottom, the worst books that I read in 2024, the textbook, the type of reading experience where you can read a page, 5 page, an entire chapter, and have zero idea of what you just read. So let's get into the tier list. Starting off, the first book that I finished in 2024 was Lincoln Child's Death Match. Now, Lincoln Child will forever be one of my favorite authors, mainly because he wrote one of my favorite books of all time, Utopia. Utopia is one of Lincoln Child's standalone novels without it being a part of a series or recurring collaborations or recurring characters. And also, Deathmatch is the other solo novel, I believe. This was a bit of a page turner. I liked the book. I think that the mystery was interesting to set the stage for the story. Think of this very futuristic, high tech, advanced artificial intelligence in which, after a series of surveying questions and background checks, it can take customers and essentially, through a series of algorithms and systems, pair them up with their soulmate, their future um, partner for life, their future spouse, with a 100% success rate. So it takes that concept, brings that to life within the novel, and then poses a mystery that somehow involves this futuristic dating program. And so I thought it was pretty interesting. Also, kind of given the time that I'm at, we're just like, it's pretty hard to date nowadays, as well as the mystery. I thought it was good. I thought the climax was okay, but I think I like the themes and the mystery that presented. And it has sci-fi elements, and sci-fi is my favorite genre to read. So, page turner, pretty good. Don't need to go too much into it. Next up is Clara and the Sun, written by Kazuo Ishiguro. Chances are you know of the name. I only learned of the name recently. This was one of, if not his most recent book. I thought it was a casual read. I think that it does present an interesting story in which it tells the narrative of this android, Clara, our titular android Clara. She comes from a line of androids that are meant to serve as caretakers for people, emotional or physical. And this story is pretty much from Clara's point of view, trying to dissect and understand human nature and human relationships. And it is interesting to kind of hear the insights of what is essentially a machine that is run by programs and its view on what is the complex thing that is human nature. So it's Clara trying to understand why humans act the way that they do, and she tries to solve her young child's problems through a combination of what it's programmed to do as well as a little bit on hope. It's interesting, but I also didn't really think it resulted in a lot of big moments for me. It was a pretty casual read, in my opinion. I will check out more of Kazuo Ishiguro's work because I hear that he's great. But for now, I thought it was a pretty casual read. Not bad, but decent. Next up is Jeanette McCurdy's I'm Glad My Mom Died. This is a huge memoir that was very, very successful, and it was cover to cover excellent. If you're near my age at all, chances are you grew up watching iCarly and by extension Jeanette McCurdy. And after finishing this memoir, you in some ways wish that it never happened, because if Jeanette McCurdy was never in iCarly, hopefully she never went through the trauma and the manipulation and the abuse that her mom put her through. And Jeanette McCurdy's story is by no means the only nightmare that a child actor went through. Once again, it is just shaking to read something from someone that you actually watched, growing up. So a must read, like I said, if you're around my age, if you no Jim McCurdy. If you watched iCarly, definitely read this memoir. Next up, we have The Sympathizer, the Pulitzer Prize winner, written by Viet Thanh Nguyen. I think it was decent. I think it was a casual read. I am just absolutely excited that a Vietnamese author received so much attention and love for a book, for a Vietnamese story with Vietnamese characters. It's about this double agent for northern Vietnam who double agents and he kind of lives as a soldier for the VC for a while, as well as his interactions in America. I think it's interesting, but I don't really remember much of it. I don't. Once again, I'm not gonna say that it's a bad book. I'm not gonna try to convince you it's a bad book because it's not. But also, my memory just has not maintained much of what happened in The Sympathizer. Once again, I think it's essential reading if you're a Vietnamese American like myself. But pretty good, pretty good. Not much else to say. Next up, we have Saturn Run, written by John Sanford. I'm gonna also put this at the casual read tier. Saturn Run is a sci-fi book in which, if I were to set the stage, it's just about scientists discovering this anomaly happening over in Saturn, and it essentially becomes a space race narrative in which different countries different countries collab or race against each other to go to as far as Saturn for the potential promise of the resources and the power that might be gained through whatever has popped up in Saturn. And so the first half of the book is essentially the race to Saturn. It has a nice ensemble cast approach to its story, focusing on different characters on this giant ship, the different roles that each character brings. Some of them are scientists, some of them design the ship, some of them aren't even astronauts. They are just these well-known photographers meant to capture footage and stream it to Earth. I like that approach. And then the second half kind of becomes this political thriller, which was not nearly as interesting as the first half. I do understand that when it comes to space exploration, there's a lot of underlying politics into it. But once again, I don't think that as far as the writing, as far as the story goes, it was not as interesting. So pretty casual read. And yeah. Next up, we have another Vietnamese book, The Catfish and the Mandala. I thought it was a bit of a page turner. This was a bit of a conflicting read. At the time that I read Catfish and the Mandala, written by Andrew Pham. This is I believe, memoir of Andrew Pham's experience being Vietnamese. And I said it was a conflicting read because he really had to toss and turn with his Vietnamese American identity because he grew up in Vietnam, he experienced the war, he had to flee Vietnam. So he speaks the language, he understands the culture, but then after living in America for a while and going back, he just doesn't feel like he belongs anywhere. When he goes back, so the story sets the stage like he's biking around the world to try to find himself. He quit his job and now he's biking around the world. Whether or not he's in Mexico, France, or anywhere else, he's seen as Japanese. He's seen as Korean. He experiences racism across different cultures. And then when he goes back to Vietnam, he's seen as Viet Gu, which is, a Vietnamese person who did not live in Vietnam. And even though he speaks the language and, he understands, he remembers people from the past, they also treat him differently for being Vietnamese American. So it's a conflicting read, but I think an important one too, because there's so much when it comes to Vietnamese culture when reading stories. Kind of like I said with Vietnamese movies, there's a lot of empathy that can be created when reading stories about Vietnamese people and their experiences. And so I think Catfish and the Mandala is a compelling read. Once again, check it out if you are Vietnamese American. Should be very interesting. Next up, we have Lincoln Child, another Lincoln Child book, Deep Storm. I'm gonna put it at page turner 2. I don't think that it was as entertaining as Deathmatch was chapter to chapter, but I do think that the climax was better. And to give a quick synopsis, or I guess a quick premise of what it's about, essentially, scientists believe that they've discovered Atlantis, and they have to get down there, and our main protagonist is invited on there to help support the efforts. Of course, the conflict comes in where our protagonist begins to suspect that, whatever that they're searching for here could be Atlantis, could be not. There's something a little bit more sinister going on as far as what there is to discover in the deep ocean. I think the climax was really great. I think it sets an interesting stage for the future of America, or I guess specifically Earth, and what its resources truly mean. and what it means to us humans. Very, very interesting. I do think that the themes are more interesting in Deep Storm than it was in Deathmatch, but I would say that if I were to rank this in order, I don't think that Deep Storm was as strong as Deathmatch due to the chapter engrossment. We'll put it there. Next up, we have The Dawn of AI, written by Ryan Ladoxi. Well, wait, hold on, I can't read. Lakodaxi. Yeah, sorry, excuse me. This is actually a local author. My parents, my mom, and my aunt actually knows the author of this book. I'm gonna probably end up writing a bad book report on it. I would definitely say check it out because AI is just even more relevant today than it has been ever. And by ever I mean by like the growing days, by the weeks. Last year AI was pretty relevant, but now even more so. Now AI is accelerating climate change. So I think this is a pretty interesting book to read right now. I will say that this book does feel very sequel oriented. It feels a lot like setup. I think the reason why it's called The Dawn of AI because AI does not really have much of a role in this story. It really tries to focus on its characters. To me, I didn't really care much for the characters. Didn't really have much idea what was going on. I don't really remember much of the story, but definitely check it out if you're looking for a local up and coming author. We have my last Lincoln Child book that I read in 2024, Full Wolf Moon. It was all right. I mean, I think that the quality of this book, whether or not it was the mystery, the characters, the story, the climax, I could have seen this book like being made into a Disney Channel Nickelodeon movie. Not to say that's for kids or anything, but I think it's just very serviceable. It's very standard, nothing different as far as its themes, as far as a potential werewolf sci-fi mystery story. But yeah, not really much in terms of thrill. So not really much to say. I'll just leave it at that. Next up, we have Exaltation, written by Ted Chiang. This is a sci-fi book made up of 8 or 9 short stories related to sci-fi. I thought it was all right, mainly because I only remember one story from that book, and that was the very first story. It's called what was it called? The Merchant and the Alchemist's Gate, and I think that was a really cool. Pretty much, the 9 stories takes kind of like folk tales. I wouldn't say fairy tales, but maybe like folk tales, vignette stories, ones that there are themes of humanity and lessons to learn in them, and puts a sci-fi tinge on it. Think like a futuristic version of 1001 Nights, of Arabian Nights. Think about that, but a futuristic sci-fi version of that. That's pretty much Ted Chiang's Exaltation, a collection of series. Some stories are more interesting than others. I think that if you can find the short story The Merchant and the Alchemist's Gate somewhere, I think that was an excellent story. If that was this whole book, I would have given it cover to cover great. But overall, I think the rest of the stories, I don't remember. I couldn't even tell you the rest of the stories. And that's why it's in this lower tier, probably writing a bad book report. Next up, we have Ready Player One. For those who are familiar, this was adapted into a movie by Steven Spielberg, and I think that the book is even better than the movie. This is in my first for the bookworms S tier. This is an amazing book. This is a geek's and nerd's dream because this book is just about diving in and just living your interest, whether or not it is movies, video games, TV, books, pop culture. It is a book of like that fantasy of you getting to live in your to live amongst your favorite things. Just imagine getting to watch your favorite movies over and over, to read your favorite books, and to play your favorite games over and over again. This is like a geek's dream. So if you have an interest in video games, movies, pop culture, television, entertainment specifically, and especially if you like all those things in conjunction, read Ready Player One. I think it has a lot of great stuff for you. It does have a strong bias towards the 80s, but oh my goodness, it is one of my favorite books of all time. Like I said, it's just a geek's dream. I could only imagine to live a life where I'm just researching and diving into my favorite things over and over again and living that life in a futuristic setting. I think that'd be awesome, and Ready Player One is a fun take on that. Next up, we have The Life of Pi, also another book that was adapted to a movie. I'm a big fan of the movie, and I also really like the book. I'm debating which tier I should put this in. I'm gonna leave it at Page Turner. Because I'm unfortunately comparing it to the movie. I think that the movie accomplished the same things that the book did, such as presenting the theme of religion and what it means to have faith, as well as the day to day journey of this young boy living on a raft, stranded on a raft at sea with a giant ass Bengal tiger. I think that the movie accomplishes the same things that the book did, but also it looks amazing. It's far more fantastical, far more of a journey. But I still think that Life of Pi was entertaining from its day-to-day survival. I think of a book like The Martian, which was adapted to a movie. I love the movie The Martian, but I thought the book was kind of okay for what it did. To compare, Life of Pi is a better version of that. I like the day-to-day survival more. I could say that for The Martian, I'm more of a fan of a movie than the book. In the case of Life of Pi, I am a fan of both the book and the movie. So have it at that. It was a page turner. Next up, we have Thomas Harris, who wrote Carrie Mora. Thomas Harris is best known for writing Silence of the Lambs, which was adapted into an Oscar Best Picture winning movie, Silence of the Lambs. This was my least favorite book that I read in 2024. It was like a textbook. The dialogue is just so bad and uninspired. Doesn't really get you anywhere. Don't even want to talk about that much because not much to say. Next up is Fierce Kingdom, written by Jin Phillips. I'm gonna put the. I'm probably writing a bad book report. This book is about a young mom, relatively young mom, with her young 6-year-old son playing at the zoo when all of a sudden a shooting happens at the zoo. And pretty much this book is about the this mom surviving the ordeal, or hoping to survive the ordeal, or I guess considering what is going through her mind as she's trying to hide and protect her child. As the book goes along, it is more about motherhood and what it means to protect a child, the experiences that you have with a child, how do you shield a child from this situation, you know, how you approach it. It's more about that, and it's not as thrilling as you would think it is. And maybe it is taken seriously in the sense that it's not supposed to be this epic, you know, action-packed climactic story. Like, it's scary, but aside from the first like few chapters, it's not thrilling at all. So little disappointed in how it ended. Lots of plot holes, lots of open-ended things that weren't resolved. So yeah, First Kingdom, kind of all right. Next, we have The Circle, written by Dave Eggers. The Circle is amazing. This was also adapted into a movie. I have not seen it, but as far as the book, one of my favorite reads this year. The Circle is one of the most applicable books that I could say nowadays, because it goes a lot into the loss of privacy, corporatocracy, social media, things like that. It's a little dystopian in the way where it presents a world in which privacy is kind of out the window. It poses scenarios in which, hey, there's this company called The Circle that is like an Amazon. You know, it's so influential in what it does in day-to-day life, as well as the subsidiaries that it owns. It's so influential in life, and then it's creating things to continue to push itself in everyday life. Like, for example, they create this camera, this small, relatively inexpensive camera that can be produced in bulk and placed all throughout the world. So it poses the question, what happens if we had camera coverage across every square inch of the entire world? Okay. And so it's like, all right, if this happens, then nobody would do any kidnappings because we would know where they are. Nobody would get into fights because it's going to be on camera. Nobody would rob banks. Everybody would tell the truth because everything is caught on camera. But of course, the whole question is, okay, but what about the loss of privacy that people are going to have when these cameras are showing coverage in people's homes, backyards, bathrooms, private areas? You know, what happens when if this technology was supposed to roll out? And that is just one of the many things that it presents and scenarios that this book presents. And it also does that with social media. It also does that with day-to-day life. It's a really compelling read. And like I said, it's very applicable nowadays, because I know that Zuckerberg is listening to me right now on my phone. I know, you know, we all make jokes about the FBI agent on our Apple phones. We all make jokes that Facebook or Meta is listening to our conversations. That's a very serious thing that's happening right now. And The Circle takes that, exaggerates that in a dystopian way, but still makes it sound very attainable. Like, we are not too far from The Circle. So amazing, amazing novel. Next is Ready Player 2. I loved Ready Player 1 so much that I had to jump on the sequel, and it's a great read. No, not as good as the first one, but I think it's just about what you want in a sequel. It takes the concept of the world that this VR world that Ready Player One builds up. It expands it further, creates an even more immersive environment, puts that in danger. Our characters that we all know and love are at jeopardy, and it's still a geek's fantasy. So really great one. Not much else to say. Great sequel. Read both of these back to back if you can. Next up is Douglas Preston's Extinction. This Douglas Preston, I best know, collaborated with Lincoln Child on multiple books. I would say, actually, yeah, if I were to put this in order, Douglas Preston's Extinction is my favorite thriller of the year. I read it thinking that it was just kind of pure sci-fi, but it is a thriller. It was intense. Um, Pretty much, it is think of like a Jurassic Park. Um, in which there is this resort that's revived extinct animals, and rather than the animals being the dinosaurs, or at least what we know as dinosaurs, it revives different organisms such as the woolly mammoth on the cover right there, um, the large sloth, extinct animal that was once the largest land animals, extinct rhinoceroses, for example. It takes those animals and revives them, and of course, it doesn't really. There is a threat that is posed in the story, but it's a more surprising one than the animals that I just said. And by going into this book cold, oh my god, like this was so intense. I like my stomach was just cramping at at the suspense of some scenes and the danger that some of the characters are in. Starts off as just you think it's just gonna be like a sci-fi mystery book, but it becomes more thrilling than that. So yeah, Douglas Preston's Extinction, one of the best books that I read in 2024. I think the only book that was released in 2024, except maybe Jeanette McCurry's "I'm Glad My Mom Died." That's all I can think of. So yeah, there you have it. And last but not least, I ended 2024 on a strong note with Robert McKee's story, structure, substance, and pretty much everything about writing a screenplay. I read this book because I thought I want to gain something from it, and I want to gain the ability to look at movies better. And oh my goodness, this is an amazing book. If you love movies and you want to learn a little bit about story when it comes to movies, read this book. It pretty much goes in depth on how on story structure, story trends, how to experiment with story, the values of story and screenplays and books, and it's just such an effortlessly rewarding read. Every chapter I was learning something. Every section I was learning something. There is something to learn every page about story when it comes to this book. Now, I'm not going to consider myself an expert on screenplays now. I don't expect myself to all of a sudden be a master at writing screenplays after reading just this one book. But like I said, this is such a dense read that I learned so much from. I was able to understand more movie. Like after reading this book, I was able to understand movies a little bit better already. I was able to understand the movies that I already loved a little bit more. And I even got to dissect a bit of my story that I'm writing and understand, what I've already achieved through structure and what I need to achieve in order to create a compelling story. So really fantastic, compelling read. Like I said, you're not going to understand everything that has to do with the screenplay with just one book, but this is a damn good one to get into. And there you have it. This is a tier list ranking of the books that I read in 2024. What did you read in 2024? Anything interesting? Anything disappointing? What's your favorite genres? I love sci-fi. As you can see, sci-fi is just the best genre when it comes to books. Let me know your favorite books, and yeah, I'm happy to have a conversation. Thank you all for supporting. Yeah, thank you, and I'll catch you later.